Hi folks, Josh Wolfe with Wolfe Vintage Watches here. Welcome to my shop. Today on the bench I have a 1960 Hamilton Rodney. Made from 1953 through 1964, the Hamilton Rodney is an American-made watch that came with a few calibers over its run. This particular example comes with a caliber 735. As received, the watch would tick but wouldn't run, which actually is a good sign. That means that the balance isn't broken and it probably just needs a good cleaning. Let's get this Rodney disassembled. For this model, the movement and dial are held into the case with the bezel, so it's just a matter of popping the bezel free. You can see quite a bit of verdigris on the case from the oxidation of the brass base metal. Thankfully, the movement itself looks pretty clean. To remove the handset, I'll protect the dial with a piece of plastic. Then I can pry the hands up with these hand levers. I'll loosen the dial feet screws partially so I can remove the dial. Alright, now I can work on the dial side of this 735, beginning with the hour wheel. Then I can pluck out the cannon pinion. These two screws secure what Hamilton calls the setting cap spring. This part provides the spring for the setting lever as well as keeps the keyless works and minute wheel in place. Speaking of, now I can remove the minute wheel and the setting wheel. I'll use a plastic pick to prevent losing the yoke spring as I remove the yoke. And now I can remove the spring since it's unloaded. To remove the setting lever, I need to flip the movement over to loosen the setting lever screw. With the setting lever removed, I can pull the crown and stem out of the watch. The clutch was loose enough just to fall out, but the winding pinion was held in place by a bit of gummy grease. Now on the watchmaker side of the movement, I can start removing the bridges, starting with the train wheel bridge. I didn't catch it on camera, but I let any power that was left in the mainspring down before starting. The 735 has a center sweep seconds hand that is removed first. Then I can carefully remove the fourth wheel, which actually has two sets of wheels. Next I can grab the escape wheel, followed by the third wheel. At this point, I'll remove the center wheel jewel cap. Whoa, that is a lot of grease. Not only is that entirely too much lubricant, but to me it looks like grease, whereas oil would be the more appropriate choice here. This alone could very well have been enough to stop the watch. Now I can remove the crown wheel hub, which is held in place by two screws. The hub holds the crown wheel in place while still allowing it to move freely. Now I can unscrew the ratchet wheel screw to remove the ratchet wheel itself. The click is removed next, followed by the click spring, being careful not to launch it across the shop. The barrel bridge can now be removed. It's held in place by three screws. Once those are removed, I can gently pry the bridge up with a screwdriver. With that out of the way, I'll snatch up the center wheel and the barrel. Now is a good time to get the setting lever screw. Here I'm removing the third wheel lower jewel bridge. It too is pried up before I get my tweezers in there. Alright, time to get the upper balance jewel setting out. I open the shock up with the tips of my tweezers, then I can grab the jewel and the end stone. I make sure to close the shock back up so that it doesn't get lost or damaged in the ultrasonic machine later. The jewel and the end stone are cleaned separately in a one-dip bath. With that chemical bath doing its thing, I can now remove the balance cock. Except, whoops, I need to loosen the hairspring stud screw first. Alright, now I can turn my attention back to the balance cock. Looks kind of gooey underneath. The balance and hairspring all look good, and they also take a swim in the one dip. The pallet bridge can now be removed. It's held in place by 2 screws. Prying it up is done with care to prevent damaging the pallet pivots. And out comes the pallet fork. Before I forget, I'll tighten the dial feet screws down so they don't disappear. Placing the barrel onto a steel block, I use my fingers to press down and pop the barrel cap off. Then I can remove the cap and work the barrel arbor free of the mainspring. Pulling the first few loops of the mainspring free of the barrel, I work the rest of the mainspring out with my thumbs. I'll pop the crystal free of the bezel, which also has a bit of verdigris, but should clean up nicely with a little elbow grease. Speaking of elbow grease, I'll go ahead and clean up as much of this verdigris and schmutz as I can now so that the cleaning solution in the ultrasonic machine doesn't have to work as hard and is more effective. Alrighty, after more than half an hour in the heated ultrasonic, it's reassembly time. I'll start with rewinding the mainspring. The mainspring is what powers the watch. The energy from the mainspring travels through the train of wheels and is released by the escapement in a predictable and precise way. The regular release of energy is how a watch keeps time. Here I'm coaxing the last bit of the mainspring into the handle of the winder. I'll release the tension on the winder and pull out the arbor. You can see how tightly the mainspring is when it's fully wound. Lining up the barbs in the end of the mainspring with the hole in the barrel, I'll press down on the handle, which pushes the wound mainspring into the barrel. I'll add a bit of oil to the barrel arbor, and then I can work it into the end of the mainspring and through the barrel hole. Another bit of oil on top of the arbor and the barrel cap is refitted, again lining up the barb at the end of the mainspring with the hole in the cap. This is what secures the mainspring inside the barrel so it doesn't slip. Using the flats of my tweezers, the cap is snapped home. Because I won't have access to it once it's installed, I'll lubricate the lower jewel for the third wheel. The escape wheel now is installed, as is the center wheel. I'll add a bit of oil to the hole where the barrel arbor will sit and then refit the barrel. The setting lever screw is installed again here since I have a nasty habit of forgetting it. The sooner I get it back in, the lower the chances of me having to partially disassemble the movement. The barrel bridge is now reinstalled. The fourth wheel can now be worked back into place. The lower wheel interacts with the third wheel and the escape wheel like normal. The upper wheel interacts with the center sweep second hand wheel, so it can be a little awkward to get everything lined up correctly. Before I can move on to the rest of the train of wheels, I need to get the crown wheel installed. This wheel is what transmits the winding motion of the stem to the ratchet wheel, and then ultimately to the barrel arbor to wind the mainspring. The observant among you will notice that the center wheel jewel cap is back in place. That's totally not because I forgot to get the crown wheel installed earlier and had to backtrack. Anywho, the crown wheel installed, I can work the third wheel under the fourth wheel and into its lower pivot hole, which can't be seen. This needs to be done through feel. Now the center sweep second hand can go back in place. Okay, time for the train wheel bridge. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This design can try the patience of just about anyone. All 4 pivot holes need to line up for the bridge to drop into place. There isn't much of a trick to it other than to take your time and manipulate each of the wheels to line everything up. Through the magic of editing, we just got through maybe 10 minutes of fiddling around and can now secure the bridge with its screws. And this is exactly why I try to get the setting lever screw back in as early as possible. If I would have forgotten it, I would have to take off both the train wheel bridge and the barrel bridge. It's not the end of the world, obviously, but annoying for sure. The click is called the click because it clicks against the ratchet wheel as the watch is being wound. Here I'm lubricating the top of the barrel arbor with some oil, and I can clean up after myself and remove any excess oil with a bit of Rodico. The ratchet wheel has a square hole that lines up with the barrel arbor. The teeth of the ratchet wheel mesh with the crown wheel as well as the click. Sometimes it falls into place fairly easily, and others, a bit of shimmying and shaking are in order. I use a plastic pick to hold the click in place to steady the ratchet wheel as I tighten the screw. The pallet fork is up next on the reinstalling list. Kind of hard to see here at this angle and because I decided not to focus, but the pallet fork is lined up on the same plane as the escape wheel, and the pivot is lined up with its pivot hole to drop into place. The pallet bridge provides the upper pivot hole and could take some time to align properly. Once the bridge and the pallet are all lined up, the bridge is secured with 2 screws. Before I put any wind into the mainspring, I check for free movement of the pallet. Once that's confirmed, I'll give the mainspring a wind or two, then check that the pallet is indexing properly. This confirms that power is making its way through the entire train of wheels. Before installing the balance, I want to give the lower balance jewel a good cleaning and inspection. Just like the upper jewel, I'll give this guy a trip to the One Dip Spa. Clean and dry, I can now lubricate the endstone. I like to use auto oilers, but this can absolutely be done with a hand oiler. A very tiny amount of oil is added to the endstone, and then the jewel setting is set back into place. The setting and the endstone are then placed back into the watch. The shock is flipped back and the 2 arms of the spring are moved under the settings, securing everything in place. The balance is now refitted back onto the balance cock. I line up the hairspring stud with its hole, then carefully lift everything up with tweezers. Using my smallest screwdriver, the hairspring stud screw is tightened down, securing it to the balance clock. I'll add a little more power to the mainspring and lubricate the exit stone of the pallet fork. Now to see if we're on track. The balance is maneuvered into place so that the lower pivot falls into its jewel, the impulse jewel is on the open side of the pallet fork, and the balance wheel is under the center wheel. If we've done everything correctly, we should see and hear something like... I'll secure the balance cock with the screw and, just as with the lower balance jewel, lubricate and install the upper balance jewel. Using auto oilers, I'll add oil to all of the pivots of the train of wheels. On the dial side now, the setting lever is refitted. Since the setting lever screw is actually on the other side, I need to hold the lever in place with my finger as I flip the movement over and tighten the screw. The clutch wheel and the winding pinion are lubricated with a bit of grease. This not only prevents unnecessary wear and tear, but it also helps provide a smooth feel while winding or setting the watch. Grease is also applied to the facets of the stem, which will slide into the winding pinion and clutch wheel. You can see here how the stem interacts with the setting lever. And now we've reached the out of focus section of the video where I apply grease to the arbor before installing it to the cannon pinion. I'll add some oil to the post for the setting wheel here, as well as for the minute wheel. The minute and setting wheels can now be installed, bringing this video's out of focus section to a close. Grease is now applied to the groove in the clutch where the yoke will ride, as well as to where the yoke will pivot. And of course, where the metal-on-metal contact between the setting lever and the yoke also gets some grease. The yoke spring here pushes against the yoke, which will push the clutch against the winding pinion when the watch is in winding mode. A bit of grease where the spring contacts the yoke. The setting cap spring is worked back into place, lining up the two posts, as well as making sure the index at the end of the spring are aligned with the post on the setting lever. Both of these indices received a bit of grease as well. These create the two positions of the crown, as you can see here. And cleaning up any excess grease. The dial feet screws are now loosened to prepare to reinstall the dial. I'll put the hour wheel back in place now. I noticed that there wasn't a dial washer when I removed the dial. Fortunately, I have some new old stock dial washers that I can dip into. I'll pick the right size and get that into the watch. This brass washer will provide enough pressure between the dial and the hour wheel to keep it in place without causing excessive resistance to the train of wheels. The dial feet screws are tightened down, securing the dial to the movement. Now for the handset, beginning with the hour hand. Since I don't need to worry about a date complication, I can just get the hand fitted and then align it with the 12 o'clock after driving it home with a hand press. With the hour hand at 12, I align the minute hand. Using a slightly smaller diameter hand press, the minute hand is pressed onto the cannon pinion. The second hand pivot tube is friction fit over the extended pivot of the center sweep seconds hand. Okay, let's get the case and bezel shined up. I like to use semi-chrome polish since it does a great job and isn't too aggressive. With gold-plated watches, it's pretty easy to polish right through the gold and into the base metal underneath. I can save this crystal. To get the large scratches out, I'll first sand it down with 400 grit sandpaper and then finish with 800 grit to a cloudy result like this. Then I use some headlight polish to arrive at something like this. The renewed crystal is then pressed back into the bezel by hand. The movement and dial are placed back into the clean and polished case. And the bezel is snapped back on. Check out my website, wolfevintagewatches.com. To see other service and restoration videos, click this playlist, or head on down a YouTube rabbit hole by clicking on this video. Either way, please consider subscribing and liking this video. Be sure to leave your comments and questions below, and I'll do my best to respond. As always, thank you very much for watching. See you next time. Bye.